Oh, what a nightmare. I just can't hit this club. Oh, Manu, why do you suck so much? Why do you suck so much? Any of those look familiar? Funny how we talk to ourselves on the golf course, isn't it? And what we don't realize is how we talk to ourselves also heavily affects how we play. Because the words that we use to describe our experience also end up massively defining our experience. And that can completely wreck the mental game if we don't do it right. So initially I was gonna do a video about the 10 worst things I've heard on the golf course. But as I got into it, I started realizing they all fall into 3 categories. And once you understand those 3 categories, it's really easy to change. So that's what this video is about. Let's get into it. Hey, I'm Manu, great to have you here. So let's start with category 1, which is hyperbole or inaccurate statements. So the other day I was playing with a buddy of mine and he was having kind of a rough day. Not the worst, but a little bit rough. And on one of these holes, he hits a push fade at, supposed to go straight, and the ball ends up going a little bit to the right. Tiny bit, maybe not that much. And he goes, oh, nightmare. And I was like, what? Wow, you're in a park hitting a ball with a stick. This is a nightmare? Like, my nightmares are being chased by snakes and clowns and...
Don't you think it's time you finally faced your greatest fear? Snakes? No. Clowns? No. Snake clowns.
And random stuff like that. So this is, I would happily upgrade to your nightmares anytime. And it's not just him, we all do this. But being inaccurate really hurts us. On both sides, being overly negative or overly positive can hurt us. Imagine you and I were lost together in a forest. When we were together, we wouldn't feel lost. But imagine we are lost and we found a map. Now, the most important point on this map is not where we want to go. It's where we currently are. And if we're overly pessimistic about it, say we're in the middle of a mountain, and we think we're at the bottom in the rainforest waters, piranha infested, also sharks, because why not? That would not help us get to our outcome because we're overly pessimistic about where we are and we wouldn't find the right path. And the same thing on the other side. So if we thought we're at the top of the mountain, you might take a different path to get to where you wanted to go. And so one thing that's really important and a good characteristic of really good golfers and really good leaders in general is being truthful about where they are, not being overly rosy or overly, I don't know what the opposite of rosy is, pessimistic about where they are. So from a self-talk perspective, maybe instead of nightmare or I suck so much today or I just can't hit this club, maybe something along the lines of, I'm really having trouble gauging green speed these past 3 holes. There's a reason I said it in exactly that way. There's a quiz coming, so keep that one in mind. And applying this to my buddy's story about using the word nightmare, imagine if it was you, how would you feel if instead of saying nightmare because you just hit the shot, you said something like, that's the 3rd time I've hit a push fade with my mid-irons today. That's interesting. Just the weight on us from nightmare, which is unsolvable, to I'm push fading my mid-irons. It's much more solvable. It's a very easy kind of answer where you're like, oh, either change your swing or don't hit the mid-irons, hit something different. Gives you way more agency and way more better outcomes versus now you're stuck in a nightmare and you just gotta like make it through till you get home. Probably not gonna have the best round from there. And that brings us to category 2 of terrible mental talk, which is forward-looking statements, or what I also like to call forecasting the future. So the story here is of my buddy who I play with here at our local course, our home course, who his favorite line all the time was, I just can't get the hang of these greens. No matter what, whether it was on the practice green, whether it was on the course, every time he missed a putt, he would repeat this. I just can't get the hang of these greens. The funniest thing is he was kind of proud of this and he would tell new people who we hadn't played with before, like, I just can't get the hang of these greens. What? A, it's a muni, they're not that fast. B, the guy shoots even par on like a regular basis. Like, he obviously got the hang of these greens, right? And C, they change every day. So even if you can't get the hang of these greens some days, other days they'll be perfect for whatever your specific speed is. Now the eagle-eyed among you might notice that at the end of the last section I said, I'm really having trouble reading green speed these past 3 holes. I told you there'd be a quiz, right? You'll notice in that statement, everything I said was backward looking. There was no forecasting the future, no forward looking part of that said, I'm not gonna be able to get green speeds at all today. It was purely about the past. That's because forward looking statements put us into a state of being stuck because we're basically resigned. And that famous line from Henry David Thoreau where he talks about how resignation is confirmed desperation. Yeah, it's kind of desperate when you're totally resigned that, oh, I just can't get the hang of these greens. And a quick tangent here, that famous line of Thoreau's, the massive men lead lives of quiet desperation, I was thinking about the other day and I was like, this really applies to golfers, huh? Feels like he's just talking about golfers. The massive golfers lead lives of quiet desperation. Not us, obviously, because we're upbeat golfers, but all the other chumps. Yeah, other chumps, which implies that we are also chumps. It's okay, we're good. And the biggest issue with forward-looking statements is because we usually put an I next to them and something about the future, they start becoming identity statements. And if you listen to Tony Robbins, one of the things he talks about is the strongest force in the human psyche is the need to stay consistent with our identity. So while on the outside, we might be thinking, oh, it's not a big deal. We're like, I can never get the hang of these greens. There's a part of our subconscious that's hearing that and continuously reinforcing that. So forward-looking statements, maybe not so useful. So instead of saying stuff on the course like, I just can't hit driver today, or I always suck at this course, I hear that one a lot, or I'm just not a good wedge player, or I can never get the hang of these greens. Maybe we say something slightly different, something that talks about that in the past, so it doesn't become part of our identity, it's just something that's already happened. And, or you can add in the word yet. So for example, for that first one of I just can't hit driver today, instead of saying I just can't hit driver today, that's a future-looking statement. Now we're stuck. Now, yeah, you might change that by not hitting driver, but it kind of makes you feel like you're in a box and you can't get out. A better statement might be something like, so far I've hit driver a few times and every time it's gone to the right. Do I want to change this? Do I want to change my swing a little bit to try to fix this? Or does it make more sense for me to 3-wood? Now, that comes from a place of a lot more agency. And agency gives us a sense of freedom. So just that one little statement instead of, imagine this, imagine going, oh man, I just can't hit driver today. Now you're stuck. Now the next time you have driver in your hand, your brain's gonna go, you can't hit driver today, man, you just can't do it. Versus if you're like, the last 3 holes I've hit driver, it hasn't gone where I wanted it to go. Do I wanna fix this with my hands or do I wanna hit 3-wood? The next time you're on the tee, you might be like, all right, here's what I'm gonna do differently. Or you're standing there with 3-wood because you're like, all right, this is the right move for me to make, given that I don't have the time to try to fix my driver because I need to post a good score today. So turning those forward-looking statements into something that's a little more past-looking and making it something that's happened. It's not you, it's the circumstances that existed in the past and or something that you can change going forward. Huge difference, completely changes the way you think. And that brings us to category 3, which is anger, which we all have. A story on this one is hilarious. I used to play with this guy who, a couple times around, he was like a 10 handicap, so he hit a few bad shots around, but every time he'd hit a bad shot, he'd be like, oh, you suck, friggin' kill yourself, you loser. What? That's a strong statement. It was pretty funny to watch and he used some fruitier words in that, but it was also one of those things like, that's an aggressive response. Now, not all of us talk to ourselves like that, but we do get angry, right? Things like, why do you suck so much? Or why can't you just get this right? Or loser. And that's fine sometimes. You gotta let the frustration out. We all get annoyed. You gotta feel the feelings, right? It's kind of an important thing. If you don't feel the feelings, they get repressed, other things happen. But I think it's also important to recognize here that often anger is just a cover for the fear that we actually feel because we're afraid of feeling a different feeling, maybe a feeling of failure or a feeling of not being good enough or something else along those lines. Think about it. When an animal is threatened, when humans are threatened, what do? We freeze, fly, flight, or fight. That's where that anger comes in. But the real question is, who are we talking to with all this anger? Usually it's your inner child or your inner children, depending on your inner family. If you're interested, as an aside, there's this great book on internal family systems, a form of therapy. It's called No Bad Parts. I've linked it down below in the description. And there are 2 issues with self-directed anger. The first is it usually rattles us even more. It doesn't make us better. Very few people get better by being angry at themselves. For most of us, it rattles us even more. And so it puts us into even more fight or flight, which you go down that vicious spiral pretty quickly. And the second thing is we're yelling at our inner child who's basically always trying to help us. Now, it doesn't always feel that way, but our bodies, even our ego, at least from everything I've read and the way I believe this, is that everything about us is always trying to help us. Like even when I make a stone cold top, right? It's because while some part of my swing didn't work out right, my brain and the rest of my body still figured out how to manage to get the club back on the ball in the right spot. So if this didn't work out properly and the brain didn't do anything, I might have fallen back here. And so instead of being angry at myself that I made a bad swing, what I like to think of instead is, oh, I thank the part of me that actually compensated for my terrible whatever first thing that I did. And yes, I know that's a part of me too. That's a different story. We'll talk about that another time. But at least I'm grateful to myself for like catching up and recognizing that my body did the rest of this work for me.
Hey, Jamie, what would you rather be, a lion or a panda?
Coach, I'm me. Why would I want to be anything else?
I'm not sure you realize how psychologically healthy that actually is.
And that's also a really reassuring thought because it reminds me that there's some athleticism in there that can come out when I really need it, even when I don't know that I might need it, but it will come out and do the right thing on its own automatically. And here's an interesting question. Maybe you have kids, or maybe you've been around young children. Would you ever talk to them the way that you talk to yourself on the golf course? For most of us, I don't think so. It's funny how harsh we are with our own inner child, even though it's part of us. And a lot of the things that we're doing today, the way that we're driving this vehicle through life, is being driven by the part of us that was formed many years ago. So just being a little bit kinder, a little bit gentler to that, and recognizing that the anger we have is usually a fear. It's a cover for feeling some other feeling that we might be having, like not being good enough, or I'll never get better, or things like that, which again is a forward-looking statement. There are better answers to that. And maybe like taking a breath, feeling, understanding, you hit a bad shot. I go, whew, that sucked. Actually, that sucked so bad it didn't even show up on the monitor. But that's okay. I will figure it out as I go forward. In the moment, I can sit and I can embrace the suck. That sucked. Maybe I missed a putt. I actually did this 2 weeks ago. I had a tournament where I had a rough mental day, but I managed to hold it together. And on the 18th hole, I was even par and the cut was even par. The cut was actually 73. I double bogeyed the last hole. Now, that sucks. It sucked for a long time, but there were no like long-term identity statements that came out of that, right? It was just, that's what happened on the last hole. That's okay. I sat, I felt, I embraced the suck. And then I realized, okay, this teaches me something. So the next time I'm gonna be extra conservative on the 18th hole when I'm hitting my drive. And there's better answers to that. All right, so the 3 keys to great mental talk. Number 1, be accurate about what happened, not overly pessimistic and not overly optimistic. 2, make it backward looking with this is what happened in the past instead of making an all-encompassing all-day today statement. And then step 3, make a useful statement that acknowledges your desire to do better next time. And if you need to get angry, you can get angry. Just watch out for directing that anger at yourself versus just out. Let it out. It's all good. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. Thank you for being here. Leave me a comment, use the buttons, tell me what you thought, and I'll see you next time. Ciao.